Thank you. These were absolutely excellent talks. I thank all the speakers for their inputs. Again, what is so important about this forum is that we bring experts to Congress to have, the input into the decision-making process. And, oftentimes we make the decisions before having a full range of understanding about the potential implications for policy from a scientific perspective. This is what we see now with some of the blanket policies that are being rolled out with respect to marijuana legalization and criminalization, where the public is not being informed, for example, about the impacts of marijuana on adolescent brain development and the potential for people to understand and make more informed decisions. Blanket policies can have effect on the extent to which teenagers perceive adverse effects of these substances. And that is in direct reverse correlation with their propensity to use. So as they continue to believe that there are no adverse effects, they're likely to be more likely to use, right? So, these sorts of things, we want the public to be informed so that they can make decisions, and we also want to bring this to the fore in a prevention forum. So I'm going to open it up now to the audience to ask questions of our speakers. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carrie Barnhart. I hold a master's in educational leadership, renewal, and change. I've had 28 surgeries over my 37 years. The last few have been just to be able to ambulate from my bedridden state to the toilet. I take one oral opiate, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I do fentanyl patches. I answered the call to be an advocate and an ally and a lobbyist for other people like me that aren't articulate, that don't have the drive like I do. I'm here and I'm holding back bawling tears, the ugly crying, the snot flying, painful tears. I was very moved by your testimony. In answering that call, I started a lobbying volunteer group, so we have a nonprofit, and I'm here for all those across the country that couldn't be here today. And I have gone myself to the FDA on September 17th, and I shared my testimony there. And I went down to the CDC in Atlanta, shared my testimony there. So there are patients that are willing to stand up and to share our stories, to challenge the data. I'm one of those, I love reading scientific journal articles for fun. So I've actually read everything that you have posted up there. My question is, being this advocate and this lobbyist and a resource for so many thousands of people that I just know, I get hundreds of stories every day about wanting to end lives. And personally, if my pain's not managed, I am begging my mom to kill me. And it's not rational, and pain doesn't come from that rational place. The biggest culprit that we have to face right now is insurance companies. A lot of the insurance companies are using the CDC data to go, the CDC says that's not safe for your treatment. So now we have governmental agencies in my doctor's office, and so many people are committing suicides, but they don't want to do it with any kind of opiate because they don't want to be used as a weapon to the other 20 million people in pain. So my question is, where do we matter in these panels? The FDA had no pain patient. There's no pain patient on your committee here. Where do we matter? That's just like a bed-bound, can't do anything other than to contribute to society like this.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you are voicing up, and I'm glad there are people like you that speak up. And I think that, in every tragedy, you have to recognize what may be some things that it helps us advance. And in the tragedy opioid crisis, what it has forced the government to realize that we need to put resources to address the issue of pain. In the healthcare system, as I mentioned, we have neglected pain. And we have neglected it for many reasons, including its complexity. and the patients are suffering. So what we're now seeing from the perspective of NIH, where we've been assigned $500 million for research on opioid crisis on an annual basis, half of that money is going to advance treatments, and that includes proper utilization of medications and prevention, which is the other aspect that we haven't discussed about prevention of pain. What is it that we can do to prevent pain? And two, the other component as we bring forward is what has the structural system of the healthcare, how has it contributed to a lot of the pathology that we have? Because it's very expensive for a physician to spend the time required for a patient with pain. So in many instances, they are just basically neglected, giving up prescriptions. So what I would say to you, and you definitively have my commitment, and you can see in any one of my dispositions, I was horrified when once, it was probably like almost 10 years ago when I came here, and I was approached by a congressperson, I'm not going to say, to sign a petition to ban opioids, and that horrified me. So I came back to NIH, and I said, guys, we have to be proactive, because we have this polarized perspective of there's everything bad or not, and we are going to do an enormous amount of harm. So we are in that difficult dialogue that there are two stories that are real. A story of people suffering from pain with not many alternatives, and a story of people that have become addicted, sometimes because improper practices. Those two are realities. Doesn't mean that actually that is one or the other. And our strategies for treatment and prevention have to recognize that diversity of these two very complex areas. So thanks again for speaking up, and certainly what you've said has really is not something that I would forget.
Thank you. Over here, please.
Hi, my name is Cindy Damrosch. I'm a chronic pain patient. Also, I suffer every day. I take opioids. I'm lucky enough that my doctor hasn't cut me off. Well, I've been cut off, but half of what I used to take. So I barely function. It was very difficult to get here. My question, basically, as you spoke about, this is a polydrug epidemic, and that you've seen over the years the drug of choice changes. Why can't our legislators see that this is a crisis of addiction, not a crisis of one particular drug?
I thought you were going to give me an easy question. I think the way in which you frame the question is the challenge. Often politicians respond to thing that appears to be an emergency.
Yes, like the
and so, unfortunately, that is also not a new phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And so, when I mention the need to tell a story and an empirical story, it is about telling that story over and over again.
Yes.
And it is about taking advantage of this specific epidemic. And folks will, as we talk about it, we are talking about this epidemic because who it impacts, right? And so the reality is the demographics of where it started really help undergird why we're talking about it. But it's still an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so what I would continue to have folks do is now take advantage of the focus on this particular epidemic and think about it more broadly. So we don't just talk about opioids. We understand that, and when you do toxicology test, it is very rarely that the only drug that's in their system is opioids. And so again, it is about us taking advantage of the stage that we have to do the things that we never could do before when the stage wasn't there. And so I applaud all those who are suffering with chronic pain to be in this room today, because that's a story too. And we would be remiss and disingenuous of us not to highlight the fact that you were in this room. So everyone who's tweeting, twittering, or whatever folks do, make sure that you show that point, that individuals who could barely get up in the morning thought it was important to be in this room. And so that's what I mean by empirical storytelling too. You are data. And so we've got to figure out a better way that everything that we do can't be stuck in a peer-reviewed journal, right? We have to look at multiple modes of disseminating and informing the public and including our elected officials. So I implore you to continue to be vigilant, continue to tell your story, seek out prevention scientists and other researchers that you as a collaborative can make that point.
Okay, great. Yeah, I am an advocate for Maryland pain patients, so thank you.
Could I say one thing? Could I say one thing about the
Yeah.
suicide crisis related to it? I think, can everybody hear me? I think a huge problem is that we don't really know the full extent to which a lot of patients are committing suicide. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to quantify. A lot of people say that this is not that bad. Tapering off opioids is fine. People do it all the time. You both know it's hellish. If there is a way to try and figure out how many people are actually suffering, I think that, we have experts here who could help study it.
Get with me afterwards and I can show you
Yeah.
a YouTube video that has all of the chronic pain patients
Yeah.
that committed suicide. There's a YouTube video. Yeah, a lot, not all of them, but there's a lot.
Yeah, there was an article published a couple of weeks ago in the Washington Post by a former nurse, chronic pain patient, and she keeps a list. A lot of people keep lists.
Here's the veterans.
Yeah,
And the veterans as
It's
well.
63% of veterans have undertreated or untreated
Yeah.
pain that commit suicide. The new statistics for the CDC is 27
Yeah.
a day instead of 22 now. That's on their site.
Back here?
Hi, my name is David Rosenzweig. My question is for Dr. Volkow. So we talked about the importance of opioids as a tool in the medical system and preserving the availability of that tool. I'm a big believer in informed consent, both for patients and for providers. And so one of your slides mentioned 10 to 20% of people exposed to opioids might eventually develop addiction. My question is, if you change the denominator to people with dependence, what percentage of people with dependence do you think go on to develop addiction? And how well is that relationship understood? What's the dose response, so to speak? What's the time to event? How good is our evidence base? Among those who are dependent, how many transition to addiction?
That's a very good question. And first of all, I would say that the risk for opioid addiction, as we see it currently, is 10%, not 20%. And I would some say 8 to 10%. And I emphasize, because again, one of the rhetorics that we have to counteract is the sense that people say up to 30 or 40 or 50% of people given an opioid will become addicted, and that's utterly wrong. Of people that are being treated for pain with opioids that become addicted is probably actually even less than 8%. So let's be conservative and say we go to 10%. Of those that have physical dependence, what is the risk? How much does it increase? No one per se has looked into that specific situation. It is likely that if you are improperly managed, if your physical dependence is not properly managed, you have increased risk because you're going to be continuously exposed to an opioid as a means to escape the physical withdrawal symptoms, which are very negative. So you get conditioned to that, and you seek that as a way to actually, and then that increases the value of the opioid. So the opioid, you're not taking it because it makes you high, or you're not even taking it maybe because it removes the pain, you're taking it to get rid of the withdrawal. So when I went to physical withdrawal, I thought that pain was much better than that physical withdrawal. So I took the opioid and then the withdrawal disappeared. So if you don't manage it properly, that's likely to increase. But is it increasing it to 20, 25, 30%? It would be just speculative on my part to say, because there's no data on that point. Just the concept that it could increase the risk of someone to become addicted. Just as I also mentioned, and one of my colleagues who happened to be an anesthesiologist, who happened to have severe pain, was given opioids, and he was delaying the consumption of the opioids because he didn't want to take them frequently. So until the pain became so severe, he will take it. And then immediately the opioids became extraordinarily salient because they allowed him to escape, and he became severely addicted to the opioids. So these are practices that we're using in medicine that we may put people at higher risk. So I cannot give you a number, but I would say that it probably does increase if you don't manage it properly. On the other hand, if you manage it properly, it should not increase at all your risk for addiction.
But following from that, what do you think the risk is of reducing access to legitimate pain medication in the context of pain?
Well, I think
When-
that, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think it's antithetical to what we do in medicine. If we have a patient that is benefit from a treatment and there is nothing better than we can give them, and if we don't treatment, that patient is going to have intense suffering, that's malpractice.
Right, yeah.
So the issue becomes along, and I guess it's because we like to simplify the narratives and say, oh, just treat it, but treat it with what? Pain being extraordinarily complex to treat. And so to the extent that there are many patients whose only response to treatment is an opioid, then it's very difficult for the healthcare system to justify removing. What are you going to give them?
Right.
And that's whereupon I think that it becomes crucial to not harm patients on the one hand, while at the same time, in parallel, developing research and knowledge that can enable me as a clinician to treat that person better, so that their outcomes are better.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ignorance all around, and I would think that if you withdraw treatment that's so badly needed without a substitute, without weaning properly, and still having the pain on board, you're much more likely to transition to addiction, whereas you had been previously dependent.
Not only transitioning into addiction, but the other issue that clearly emerges, if you are physically dependent, you have severe pain, and then they remove a treatment that is controlling the pain,
Right.
that increases your risk of suicide.
Right, yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the aspects of what we're observing, because you are generating a situation of where there are no alternatives, and the intensity of the negative response and emotion and suffering is enhanced.
Right.
So it's a very complex issue.
is.
That's why it's not a black and white. And at the same time, I also fully recognize that many patients are suffering from severe addiction and die from addiction and commit suicide because of addiction, because of improper practices in the healthcare system. So both of these two things are true.
Right. Thank you. You were next, I believe.
I don't know where to start. I have like 8 questions, but my name is Julie Litton. I'm also a chronic pain patient. I'm also a retired PA, and I gave my testimony to the HHS Pain Management Best Practices Interagency Task Force, and part of my testimony is in the written final report. Under the section on stigma, my name is somewhat anonymous because I talk about suicidal ideation and having to be hospitalized, but I will tell you that here. It's a very severe problem. Luckily, that part of my story came in early in the story, and now I am in pain management. But I sympathize and empathize with thousands of stories that I've heard throughout the years on chronic pain support group, Facebook pages, and now advocacy work that I do. I hear it every day. That is something that I do. I'm a senior, I'm retired, I could not work, even if I wanted to, even part-time as a PA. Because I'm unreliable. I have good days and bad days. So I want to thank Dr. Byrne for your testimony. I think when you have a platform as a professional, somehow, hey, let's face it, it gives you some standing, and people might listen to you more, unfortunately, in our society, but
Yeah.
I just appreciate it very much.
We just had Lady Gaga come out too.
Yeah, we're looking for a celebrity. I also want to couch this by saying that I don't have people with addiction in my life, but, this is a competing thing, and we hear about all the dollars that are going to help people with addiction and about all the overdoses, and it's tragic, and it has a negative impact on us, because what are we going to do about, what can you do about the false narrative in the public that it's opioid medications and doctors that are still causing this crisis when we know that it's not? It's the, fentanyl, illicit fentanyl and analogs and fentanyl-laced other, counterfeit medications laced with fentanyl, and now rising cocaine and methamphetamines and combinations of everything. It just seems like legislators, policymakers, the president are behind, like by 4 or 5 years on this. And, as scientists, as physicians, and us as chronic pain patients, we know, we read, we listen. So that's, what are we gonna do about that false narrative? That's still, and one other thing is that with the CDC guidelines, which maybe in and of themselves, in a nice little box with a bow, not the 90 MME limits, but, there was some benefit there, but the way it's been weaponized has hurt chronic pain patients so much that, should it be rewritten, should it be thrown out and completely undone? There's still the narrative that the CDC guidelines are like it, and they have hurt people. One of the things that follows that is a false narrative that because there are no long-term studies to show that opioids are effective, then that means that they don't work long-term. I'm sure that I will be a chronic pain patient taking a relatively low dose of opioids for the rest of my life, and I'm also a person that can mitigate that lower dose by doing a lot of other things. I do, self-care and other treatments, so I'm not looking as that to be the one answer. And that's, why isn't the final report of the task force being talked about more in Congress? Okay,
Well,
that's
thank
about
you.
3 different questions.
No, I know that was so many, and
I'm
thank
sorry.
you. No, it's fine. I think some of them are going to require some thought and, and certainly a lot of education on the part of a lot of different constituencies. We are going to lose our room, so I'm terribly sorry. There might be some who can stay back and address some questions, but.
Can I make one statement on suicide? Sorry, we'd spoken, you were talking about that. I wanted to mention the fact, you said something about trying to figure out how. I'll tell you what, it's not that I'm planning, but if I was going to, I would stop taking my heart medicine. I would stop taking other medicines. Nobody would know that it was a suicide. It wouldn't be an instant thing. I would do that so my family could have my life insurance. I don't think we'll ever have an accurate idea. I think the heart attacks we're seeing increasing. I think there's going to be a lot of those that we'll never know, because I want my family to have my life insurance. I want my family to think it was something other than that. So
Exactly.
That was
You will get insurance if it's suicide. Yeah, there's a lot hidden, and there's a lot of data that have yet to be collected that are absolutely going to be instrumental in guiding our policies. So, thank you. Thank you all very much.